Boom. Howdy, fam. Anthony Dream Johnson here today, co-founder of the Brave Man Group, founder of 21 Studios, founder of the 21 Convention, the 22 Convention to make women great again, the Patriarch Convention to rebuild the patriarchy, 21 University at 21university.com and on the App Store on your phone, and about 10,000 other things on the internet you can go download, have fun with, watch, and enjoy. That was a quick video trailer you just saw from an upcoming event, the 21 Convention 16-year anniversary for men. It's going to make men alpha again. So it's sponsored for today's show. You can learn more at the link in the description. It's at 21studios.com, link at the top for live events. And you could choose your event for men, for fathers, for women. Come out, have a great time in Orlando, Florida. Get it October 14th to 17th. It's about 75 days away. And that's Friday through Sunday. A lot of speakers going to be there, almost 30 we have on the roster between all three events. One's for fathers, one's for men, one's for women. They all happen at the same time, same hotel, same venue, same weekend at 21 Summit. There's an early bird special. It ends tomorrow night on Sunday night, end of the month. And you can also bring a friend free or a girlfriend, wife, if you're like a man, and then she can go to the women's event. And if you're a man, you can also go to both men's events as a bonus, included with any ticket you buy to either of the men's events. That's your male privilege at work. White male privilege, right? Now, without further ado, and enough from the sponsor today, please let me welcome to episode 173 of the Red Man Group, a female, a birthing person, Professor Janice Fiamengo, and Mr. Steve Brule, the 007 of the manosphere and destroying feminism. Welcome both of you to the show. Thanks for your time today. Yeah. Yep. I always try. It's a good way to get the audience captivated, get them excited for the content. The content, the title of today's show is Exposing Feminist Lies and Propaganda. And that to me is both really serious due to its very negative effects on culture and on men and on families. But also it's really funny to make fun of these people and have a good time, in my view anyway, mocking them where we can. I almost put a woman, for example, like one of the screaming feminist ladies on the front of the cover. I couldn't make it work at the last minute, but so I decided to go with you two instead. But anyway, there's a lot to talk about. So first things first, Roe v. Wade was recently overturned in America. And this had been, heralded, I'm saying that right, for decades upon decades, 50 years in America as this feminist victory. And now that's gone. And many have said, and I think it's probably true, but I want to hear what you guys think, that was one of the biggest, probably the biggest defeat for feminism and the biggest victory against feminism, maybe in recent history in America and the West. So what were you guys' thoughts, each of you, on or watching that as Canadians? Neither one of you is an American, but observing that as a fellow Westerner and watching feminism really get their ass handed to them, to put it bluntly, in a major political battle that they lost.
Janice, you want to start on that?
Sure. Yeah. I'm not sure that I guess it was a defeat for feminist ideology. I saw it primarily as a victory for constitutionalism in the United States, because really it was a fairly narrow interpretation of the United States Constitution, simply to point out correctly that there is no constitutional right to abortion, and that you simply can't read that into the American Constitution. So there are still many battles around abortion and women's alleged right to kill their unborn children. Many more battles to come, but I think it is a very important moment, and it's now going to be interesting because I think at last we are going to be able to make arguments about abortion, both pro and con, and feminists are no longer going to be able to hide behind this as simply a taken for granted right that all must agree is there. The interesting thing for me is the unwillingness on the part of nearly everybody involved to actually hold women morally accountable for their affirmation of the right to abortion. And it's the thing that I find most startling about how the discussion around abortion has evolved. It started off as this sober subject, something that was going to be when it was first promoted as a right for women, abortion was going to be safe, legal, and rare. And the idea was that it was going to be something that would be resorted to only, as a last resort, and that everybody agreed that it was a tragedy when it occurred. But we've gone from that to the embrace of abortion as a sacrament, the celebration of it, the idea that women should be unashamed and even proud of having had multiple abortions. And of course, we've even seen discussion of abortion right up until the moment of birth as, a perfectly acceptable, right of women for their convenience and their sexual liberation. So I think it's an interesting opportunity to talk about the moral evil that is involved in that kind of celebration, and to hold women accountable for that. And I don't see a lot of willingness, even on the part of pro-life conservatives, to really face squarely what this tells us about women.
Damn. Well put. Steve, your thoughts?
It's hard to add much after going after Janice, because she's thorough in her comments. She's covered pretty much all the bases. I have to say I agree with everything Janice said. I would also add to it that not only have feminists in particular, that's a strong noise. Do you guys
Sorry,
hear that?
I'm not sure how to mute myself.
Oh, is that the street there?
It's gone now, I think. I'm very sorry about that. It was just a helicopter or something going on overhead.
It's okay.
Their feminists have also, at least I would say, philosophers of law have argued for, feminist philosophers of law have argued for postnatal, what do they call it? Postnatal abortion. And it amounts to killing the child, a live, healthy child, after being born. There was two, Janice, you may remember this. This goes back probably 8 or 10 years ago or something. There were two professors who published a argument about this, which shows that there's a moral slippery slope involved here that's not even acknowledged in feminist circles, that presumes that will extend this into absurd lengths, this issue of abortion. I want to add just one more point, and that the constitutional, as it was, well, not a constitutional right, but the Supreme Court creating the right for abortion was misused right around the country to an extraordinary degree. Because, for example, I read in New Jersey a case, this was about, it was a story, there were several cases of this going on. I think it was New Jersey or New York, where if a woman who's pregnant, she gets free dental care. And what a number of women were caught doing, and reported on this, was that they would get pregnant, go and get a bunch of dental work done, and then go and get an abortion because they didn't really want the child. They just wanted free dental care. Wow. And amongst other things. This was reported in the news about, I think it was about, again, 5-8 years ago or something like this.
Yeah. And oh, sorry. Now I've got a cat making a noise in the back. Sorry, I'm really bad today. Yeah, and it's so interesting, Steve, what you're saying about the slippery slope, and the enormous indifference to the reality of what abortion is on the part of many women who celebrate it. And you can find this even going back to the earliest days in the feminist movement. And this is why it's so interesting that Steve and I are working on our history of feminism, because I think everyone has the idea that in the old days, in its origins, feminism was a sane movement for equality. But in fact, there was always this enormous indifference about the welfare of children on the part of feminist women. And we've found examples of women feminists defending women convicted of infanticide, women who clearly planned the killing of their newborn infants. In one case, a woman in Philadelphia in 1876, I believe, I may have the date wrong, who smashed her child's brains out on a bedpost, then hid the baby under the bed, and when she was discovered, claimed that she had fainted on the child during delivery. But it was very clear from what other women testified in the boarding house where she was that she had been offered assistance. People could see she was pregnant. She denied the assistance. And feminists created a narrative about her of wronged innocence. And in order to have her conviction overturned, it was, in the end, it was commuted. Very few women were ever convicted or punished, at least, even if they were convicted for infanticide, which was an extremely common crime in the 19th century. In fact, one historian estimates that about 60% of homicides were of children under 1 year old, the vast majority of those killed by their mothers. And so to see the indifference of feminists, even then, to the well-being of children and their willingness to defend women convicted of killing their children, I think there's a straight line between that because the conviction of moral innocence on the part of women is so strong and has always been so strong in the feminist movement. It's not surprising that you can draw a straight line between that attitude and the attitude towards abortion of most feminists today.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's I want to add, it's just amazing to hear. I heard you talk earlier too about the accountability of women. The innocence to the point of absurdity beyond absurdity. They're innocent no matter what, and it's part of this like no accountability thing. And it is wild to see these women want to get away with it, even like a post-birth abortion. There was even a governor in America who got in trouble for this a little bit anyway. When he went on the radio, I think in Virginia, and it was like maybe 2019. And he talked about advocating for this in his state, and it really is just insane. It's almost like Ayn Rand would talk a lot about when she was alive, like a philosophy of death, that these people, not just feminists but any kind of collectivists that they worship. It's like this worshiping of death and this total destruction against life. And it's almost too like I've heard other people talk about. It's like women want to play God. They want to choose who lives and who dies, what babies live and what babies die, even after they're born. Like it's like Steve was talking about. It's like a living baby literally came out born, and now they just want to kill it and get away with it and face no consequences for anything. And you mentioned too, Janice, like these pro-lifers even who won't hold women accountable for anything. And that itself is also aggravating. It reminds me, too, of this news article I wanted to pull up. Sadly, it's a Florida senator, which is embarrassing to my state and most people born in it. But this is Marco Rubio put forward a bill with some other Republicans and even, I think, a few Democrats in the U.S. Senate. They want fathers to start paying child support from the date of conception now that Roe v. Wade is overturned and all this kind of stuff. So I want to get your guys' thoughts on this. I mean, child support in America is already this huge scam, in my view, and a lot of people who analyze and look at feminism. But they want to actually push this now federally, so nationwide in America. They want fathers to start paying child support all the way from the date of conception, even be responsible for it after the fact or retroactively. Like if they didn't find out they were the father until, I looked into the bill a little bit, until, let's say the father didn't find out the child was born even until 6 months after the child was born. They would be responsible for all this back pay child support, even when the child wasn't born yet, even when the child didn't even, hadn't even taken its first breath. What are your thoughts on this then of, basically these men, these senators and stuff who pretend to be, pro rule of law and pro family and stuff. They want to now force men to pay child support for children that are not even born yet. Was this something you kind of expected to see, or is this a surprise, or what are your thoughts on this?
Steve, do you want to speak to this? I've got a lot to say about it, but
okay. I'll get a few points in. I'm sure you're going to cover my points as well. I think a lot of this has always been about power, and money, of course, is power. So I mean, the law holds even men who aren't the father of the child accountable for child support. And they say this, they use the rationale of best interest of the child. But I think if you look into the decisions that they call best interest of the child, they always end up being truly best interest of the mother. And I think that has its roots in the gynocentric culture that we have that goes back forever, you know. And if I might just say one or two points about the previous topic before I let this go that have been on my mind.
Sure.
You know, I did a video about this God complex that women, feminists particularly, have, that resides in the sense that and I think in part I argue a lot of things in this video, but in part it comes from, maybe this is just conjecture, a theory, that it comes from the fact that the baby is grown within the mother's body. And as being part of the mother's body for 9 months, or being growing within there for 9 months, a mother or women might have a tendency to see the child as their own body, as their own property. And they even talk on those terms a lot, you know. So that in the mentality, and I wouldn't say that this is a healthy way to see it. I would say it's a way that some women may tend to be encouraged to think of it. And so for them to think of killing the child, it's not really like killing somebody else. For them, it's like it's their property, it's their body. They have a right, even after birth. Mothers often have a very difficult time of letting go of their children. And when I say letting go, is letting go in the sense of thinking them as of them as an independent person, to such a degree that in many cultures, older cultures, that one of the roles of the men of the group, of the culture at the time, was to physically remove the child from the care of the women, the mothers, physically. And this was accompanied with all kinds of fanfare of pain and crying and blah, blah, blah. And that kind of tells you how deeply the psychology of that is my child, that is my body, and it can carry on right into puberty to such a degree, and further into very, very distorted mother-child relationships, you know, extremely distorted.
We call them son husbands in the manosphere, when the son functions like a husband because the mother has such an aggressive over-attachment to the son, especially single moms, but it can go beyond that. They use the son as like a husband, especially if there's no husband around, but even if there is one who maybe is kind of like a pushover or something. And it's really bizarre and unhealthy.
Very unhealthy. And it's an indication that we do really need the strengthening of the father, the male presence in our culture, and the father presence in particular. And I applaud these fellows who are participating in your father's group for doing that. One last point before I pass it to Janice or you, is that it's such a degree, our gynocentrism is such a degree that infanticide was separated out from murder to be a separate and lesser crime than murder. And it is to this day a lesser crime. And I'll point out too that one of the reasons I think for that is the gynocentrism, because in infanticide is almost about 99% committed by mothers. It is very rare. There's a study out on this I read about 5 years ago. That shows that it's very rare for a biological father. Okay, when stepfathers is a different story. Stepfathers can present a danger, at least according to studies, to children in the home. But the biological mother is almost the exclusive perpetrator of infanticide. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Before Janice hops in, I have a quick story I want to tag on to what you were saying, Steve. I heard this young mother once. I was talking to her about circumcision. She was about to get one of her new children, a new boy, baby boy, circumcised. And I asked her, I was trying to talk to her about why she was doing this and why it was a bad idea. And she was very flippant and kind of didn't want to hear it. Was listening a little bit, but barely. But what stood out to me is one of her main reasons for doing it was, well, I prefer the look, of a circumcised penis. To which I responded, it's not your penis. Like, who cares? It's not yours. That child is not your property. And I could tell this was completely glossing over her head. She didn't understand it, exactly like you're saying. There's this arrogance and extreme narcissism that a living, breathing human is their property. I'm sure there's some irony given my funny hat today, make women property again, of me wearing this, but mostly it's a gag hat. But in terms
Yeah.
of mothers or any parent for that matter, even a father, but the mother is the one that said this. It's like it's like the penis was hers. Like the son was not just her responsibility, but her property. And if she wanted to cut up this little kid's dick, then that's fine. And I think that's sick and evil in my view. I think it should be outlawed in every nation, male circumcision specifically. Anyway, it reminded me of what you're saying though, with the ownership that they feel that they have over children, and that's really sick and evil. Janice, did you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in on what Steve was saying about the deadly goddess mentality. Steve's done a video on this subject, and then I do want to go back also to the Florida bill about fathers, or even just men in general. They don't have to be the actual father having to pay for the child from conception. But yeah, to go back to the deadly goddess mentality, I find that such an interesting aspect of feminist or even just female morality that seems undeniably different from the male. Men in culture, as Steve was just saying, tend to have had traditionally the role of establishing moral law that applies universally. Whereas women tend to think in terms of their feelings about things. And we see that, I think, particularly amplified in feminist theorizing about various issues. It comes up very clearly in questions of sexual morality, where there is no longer to be any kind of general moral law about sexuality, right? The exact same act can either be a perfectly consensual and, healthy to be celebrated act, or it can be an act of sexual assault that should result in the alleged perpetrator being put behind bars and losing everything, or at least being publicly disgraced and perhaps losing his job and never being able to work again in his chosen profession, all depending on how the woman feels about it.
You mean like retroactively withdrawing consent or something like that?
She can, if she doesn't feel good about the whatever it happens to be in the moment, or even if afterwards she feels bad about it, she can then say, hey, I didn't consent to every single stage, even though, she never said no, or whatever it happens to be. That idea that the woman's feelings determine the nature of reality, I think that's a really startling and very evident aspect of feminist ideology that tells us where making, decisions about morality or right conduct based on feeling, especially the women's feelings, where that takes us. And we see that in regard to abortion law too, where if the woman regards her baby, her unborn baby, as a human being, then that's what it is. And if she is murdered or something is done to her and the child is born dead, well, that is seen as an act of murder. Whereas if she doesn't regard the child as a human being, then it isn't a human being. And that's the case in law now. And that's quite a startling statement, I think. It tells us a lot about the kind of morality that inheres in feminism. But then, to move on to the Florida law, again, this is such an interesting aspect of the fusion, I guess, of gynocentrism and state power, because obviously the state benefits from hooking men into, paying for women's children, that conservatives don't seem to understand. I was listening to a debate by a bunch of pro-life conservatives about abortion, and it was on the Daily Wire backstage show. And it was extraordinary, the unwillingness on the part of those, it was like 4 men and 1 woman. They were insisting that the sexual revolution had harmed women and only women. They were taking, making the line that that abortion harms women, that most women are coerced into abortion, so that it's sexually predatory men who are responsible for abortion. The women are innocent victims. It was extraordinary. It really was. And ultimately,
who are some of the guests, if you don't mind me asking? Was this like a Matt Walsh, Ben Shapiro?
Yes, Matt Walsh and Ben Shapiro were there, and
Wow. I just guessed too.
Candace Owens was the one woman. She talked about how most abortions were coerced. The ones that she knew about, the man was the one who coerced the woman. She talked in particular about a friend of hers who had been, was in a situation that was violent, and there was domestic abuse, and so like there was such a strong drive to absolve the woman. And then one of the speakers, Andrew Clavin, and I like all these people, in general. I like lots of their ideas, but it certainly made me realize that I don't have a home in that kind of conservatism at all, although in some ways I'm pretty conservative. And so Andrew Clavin said that there was discussion about, amongst feminist circles, there was discussion about forcing the man to live with the mother of his child and to pay child support. And he got a big grin on his face, and he said, "Hey, I accept the challenge," or something like that, or yeah, let's talk about that. But what he didn't understand was that is not the feminist position, and unfortunately, it isn't the position of any of these conservative states. They're never going to force the man to live with the mother of his child. Women don't want that. They want the man to be forced to pay. They want to be able to live independently from the man, and even if they wish to prohibit the man from ever seeing his children.
They want him to be a slave, basically.
Yeah, exactly. They want him on penalty of incarceration and of having his wages garnished. They want him to be obligated to pay for any child they claim is his. He doesn't even have the right in many states to have a paternity test to determine whether the child really is his or not. They just want that man to be a work slave to support them in the lifestyle that they believe is their right. And the fact that conservatives don't understand this and think that it is actually to the benefit. I mean, I don't know if they do think it's to the benefit of the child. Every study that is done on this subject shows that children benefit from knowing their father and from having their father in their lives, and that so many of the social problems that we're concerned about today are the result of father absence. I mean, Warren Farrell has talked about this for decades. Many other men's issues activists have talked about this. It's not a secret. But the fact that conservatives will pass legislation to give women power of a sort, to actually deny men the right to father their children, to keep them out of the household, to have them ejected, but still have to pay the mortgage on that house, just shows how conservatives have been captured by the feminist lobby.
I was saying the other day on Twitter, actually, that most conservatives, all Democrats in America, almost like 99.9%, are slaves to feminism, and most conservatives are slaves to feminism. Mm-hmm. They might not explicitly identify as a feminist, right? Particularly on like abortion issues, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because functionally all they do is support them. Mm-hmm. They support them, and they will. So I'm getting that noise.
Oh, that's me this time. Let me mute this. Oh. There's a truck going by.
Oh yeah, it's way better now. Okay. Anyway, yeah, I just think that most, I don't even identify as a conservative. My views, I mean, some people put me over there. My views are with the founding fathers and with Ayn Rand politically and philosophically. But these conservatives, they're in a lot of ways, you know, 20 conservatives in 2022 would have been considered radical feminist 20, 25 years ago. And they're oblivious to this. They are oblivious,
I know.
like children. They're stupid.
It drives me crazy. It's the thing that most irritates me, and I think it's part of the impetus behind the new series that Steve and I are promoting, and behind our interest in making a documentary about the history of feminism. I mean, I don't know if it's going to do any good, because it just seems that this, you know, it's not only a gynocentrism, it is an acceptance of feminist ideology. And I think that's as a result of, I think there has been generation upon generation of psychological abuse of men, feminist psychological abuse, so that even those who do identify themselves as conservatives have accepted feminist postulates so deeply that they have actually, especially men, they have come to hate themselves as men. They have accepted the feminist doctrine that there is something deeply perverse and harmful in male sexuality, in all male authority. Even. Yeah, evil, really. I think a lot of men, like a majority of men, even those men who identify themselves as anti-feminists, have been like really harmed by this psychological abuse. And it just drives me crazy. Even like I just recently I wrote an article, and I was so annoyed to see Tucker Carlson once again and again. I like Tucker in lots of ways. I think he does some pretty interesting and really helpful journalism, but he was interviewing an anti-trans feminist who is facing a jail term, although I doubt she'll get the jail term, but she's been charged with hate speech in Norway because she's having Twitter arguments with so-called trans women. And she's been telling them that, you know, a man cannot be a woman, a man cannot be a lesbian, a man cannot be a mother. Okay, so Tucker, you know, had her on his show, and he's done this many times with these types of feminists. He called her a hero. You know, he was full of adulation for her. And, and I agree that a woman should not be charged with hate speech for telling a man that he can't be a lesbian. You know, it's ridiculous.
Or a mother.
Yeah, that he can't be a mother, etc. I mean, I fully agree. But the idea that these rad femmes, these TERFs, as they used to be called, but now they're called gender critical feminists, the idea that they should be celebrated as heroes by non-feminist conservative men and held up as role models for us all, and that men should be, you know, rallied to their cause to defend these poor women who are being persecuted by the state. And I do agree that this woman is being persecuted by the state, but she is not a hero. Those rad femmes are the most hateful of the feminists. They have maintained since day one that men are barely human. I mean, they really have trouble believing that men are human. They have pushed ideas of male depravity from the very beginning. And in fact, their opposition to trans is not rooted in any kind of deep understanding of biological reality. You know, it's not rooted in any kind of commitment to truth or the sanity of cultural norms or anything that we would recognize as worth supporting. It's rooted in hatred of men, because they see these trans women as misogynistic men who want to usurp women's bodies and usurp the special privileges, protections, and government perks that rad femmes have been able to wrangle out of the state, you know, over the last 40 to 50 years. And they are so furious that though some of those perks and special protections and privileges are now being extended to a tiny portion of the population who identify as women, even if the individual is just somebody who, you know, from an early age has really believed that he is a woman and he just wants to live as a woman. He doesn't want to harm anybody. He doesn't want to cause any trouble. He just wants to be able to walk into a women's bathroom and go into a cubicle and not say boo to anybody or cause any harm. They still hate that person as a man and see him as a misogynist. I mean, the craziness of it. There is a delightful irony in their now finding themselves actually subject to hate speech laws, but they've been perfectly fine with men being subject to such laws, with men's speech being criminalized simply because some woman claimed that she was made to feel unsafe by something that a guy said on Twitter about women, even if it was simply a biological fact. So yeah, there is a delicious irony in their now facing the same thing, but the ridiculousness that they continue to claim that trans is a kind of patriarchal plot against women, and that all these conservative men jump on board and say, yes, these women are being erased and we men must come to their defense. Wow, these are the very women that would have men absolutely disempowered, criminalized for even looking at a woman, and unable to see their children, unable to be the head of their families, etc. So yeah, it's just infuriating to see how willing men are to be co-opted into that feminist movement.
I've seen this in real life too at conferences. I've been to like CPAC, one of the biggest conservative conference in America, 3 or 4 times now. And I've seen like Caitlyn Jenner there, or Bruce Jenner, or whatever she is. The trans, I think it was running for governor or something. Anyway, Caitlyn Jenner's like, this kind of talking head now that goes on TV shows. And they were at the live events, there was like camera crews from Fox News, like chasing it around, trans Caitlyn Jenner or whatever. And I'm like, why is this person even at this conference? This is supposed to be some allegedly super conservative conference. Yeah. Even Donald Trump was speaking there at all the ones I've been to. Conservative, pro-family, family values, right? We're for biological reality. What is a man? What is a woman? We know. But then they will kiss the butt of this trans person instantaneously. Like there's no hesitation to team up with these trans people. And it's utterly contemptible, I suppose is the word, and hypocritical for me to see it. And when you see it in real life too, like right in front of your face, so I'm walking around filming stuff too. And then I see them filming this person and interviewing this person and really trying to somehow buddy up with this person. It's truly insane. And it tells me that they're all beta males and they're all slaves. They're all like, who can be the best slave for feminism? And that's what I see with Marco Rubio, is like mama's boy from South Florida, unfortunately. So, embarrassment to my state and Floridians everywhere. And he's like going to be a good boy for the feminist mother of America and get men to pay for child support when a woman is 3 weeks pregnant. What does she need? Gummy bears, vitamins? What is the child support for? This is so delusional to me. It's like the open enslavement of men to just be even more of a slave for feminism and the gynocracy.
But he won't suggest that perhaps women should marry the fathers of their children.
Yeah.
He wouldn't do that, right?
No.
Even though everybody knows that financially, emotionally, she's going to be way better off overall. And families are certainly the bedrock of a conservative society, but conservatives won't say that. So yeah, I know it is remarkable. And like that's just to keep banging on about our documentary project. The thing that's been so fascinating to me about doing this intensive research into the history of feminism is that it was always there. And like nobody knows that. And, I just saw recently Ben Shapiro did a short, I think 12-minute video called The History of Feminism That Leftists Don't Want You to Know. And it starts off, as conservatives always do, by saying that feminism was once a movement with noble aims, and that it was interested in equality. And the only thing I think he said about the first wave was that they wrongly assumed that women were the same as men, and that's wrong. The movement never had what we would consider noble aims. It was never interested in equality. And in fact, feminists never said that women were the same as men. They always made two separate and contradictory arguments. One was that women were as good or better than men, and that in any time you saw an instance where women had not made the same achievements as men, that the reason was always sexism. We still see that today. That was back there in the early movement. That was one of the arguments. The other argument was that women were clearly morally superior and different from men, better, morally better, and that they required special protections, special privileges, etc., so that their superiority and their difference could be protected and promoted, because it was for the good of humanity that it be so. But, of course, those two things don't really work together, but always feminists made both those arguments. It's Ernest Belfort Bax, really interesting 19th century barrister and journalist, who pointed that out way back in like the 1880s. And that is still the case. And feminism never, ever was interested in women having the same responsibilities as men, carrying the same burdens as men, doing the same kind of work in society, attaining the same level of self-sacrifice, or certainly not having the same moral agency and accountability as men. And so it's really interesting to go back and look at the actual things these feminists had to say. And I would just wish that more conservatives who are anti-feminist would learn that history, so that they don't fall into this trap of agreeing with certain feminist postulates.
So what you're saying is all the nastiness that we see with feminism today has always been present. Mm-hmm. It's just, it's probably even more pronounced today. Yeah. And they have more power today too.
They have more power. And, that happened obviously in the 1960s when they started invading all the key institutions of society, and, especially the universities, because then they were sent out as foot soldiers. They got indoctrinated in the universities, and they were sent out as foot soldiers into every single, domain of our society. But yeah, it was always there. I think Steve, you were the one who uncovered this document. I know Karen Strawn had talked about it too, and I had never read it. It's called the Declaration of Sentiments. It was written in 1848, mainly by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was the acknowledged leader of the women's movement for the whole, second half of the 19th century. As a young woman, she got together with other feminists. They were mostly in the abolition movement in Seneca Falls, New York, and they had their big conference about women's rights and women's position in society, and they published this document, Declaration of Sentiments. It was based on the Declaration of Independence. It was supposed to be kind of, the woman's Declaration of Independence. And it has as its key thesis that the history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, having as its objective the establishment of an absolute tyranny by man over woman. And then they have all these, subclauses explaining allegedly how this absolute tyranny is being established through repeated injuries and usurpations. So there's nothing good. They have nothing good in 1848 to say about men. The whole history of mankind is that history of atrocious mistreatment and oppression. And men signed that document. That to me is... wow. What were they thinking? Did they actually believe that their sex had done nothing to protect and provide for their women folk over the whole history of humanity? And that's what I mean when I started thinking as I was reading all this stuff, and, there's way more even worse somewhat later in the century, both in Britain and in the United States. They always wanted to destroy the family. They always said it was an oppressive institution. They always wanted women to have sexual freedom. Free love for women was an important rallying cry, even in the 19th century. They never cared about the children that would be produced from these free unions. They always defended the murderers of children. They always said that male sexuality was predatory and base and sinful, whereas of course women's sexuality was wonderful and was to be liberated, etc. All the things that we already see was there. And it just made me think, like, you know, so that's 170 and more years since men signed a declaration saying that men were responsible for nothing but evil and pain and oppression. Like, what that does.
In spite of building all of civilization, largely for women and their wives and their children.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, I want to talk to you about, pick up on what Janice is saying here, though. So there's a couple of theories around, and I'd like to know what your thoughts are on it. There's a couple of theories around, obviously, the origin of feminism, talking 1848, Seneca Falls. There's a little bit earlier movements in Britain, which Janice also referred to here a little bit. But also, a lot of people today tie feminism into Marxism, into communism. But obviously, Karl Marx he was born, I think, in the early 1800s. So I don't really know how much he influenced Seneca Falls, just as an example. But also, there is some sort of link between feminism and communism, or Marxism does seem pretty strong. So what is the relationship there between the two? Are they independent kind of ideologies? Are they intertwined in some way?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That period of time, I think there was a lot of social movements at work in the world at the same time, throughout the world, in Europe and in and Britain, apart from feminism. Yeah, social kind of welfare movements, change movements. And Marxism grew up within that, as did feminism start to become popular and grow and strengthened through in that same time. And so the same people who were involved in those movements, including emancipation of slavery and all the rest of that, they were the same people at all these different groups. And so they're always talking about the same things. And so Marx was being talked about at the same time that the feminists were gathering together their movement. And the Communist Manifesto, published by Marx and Engels, was published only about 3 or 5 months, I can't remember exactly, before the Seneca Falls Conference, in which they created the Declaration of Sentiments. And some of the terminology in there is strikingly similar. Now, you could argue that manifesto, Janice pointed me out this when we were talking about this earlier, that that wasn't available in English at that time. But that doesn't mean that the ideas weren't being discussed amongst that rather tightish community of international intellectuals, leftist intellectuals. So I would be extremely surprised if that most of the group that got together at Seneca Falls weren't aware of the Communist Manifesto and the ideas within it, even if they had not seen it or read it. I'd be surprised if they weren't actively influenced by those ideas, because it's a bit striking at the similarities that they've written into that document, you know. And I'll give you the prime example here. This is a really good example because Janice brought it up earlier. The phrasing in the Declaration of Sentiments of the history of mankind, the relationships between men and women, where they say that having been oppressed on all sides by men, you know, this is the kind of phrasing that Marx used to refer to, I think, the proletariat. Is that right, Janice?
Sure. Yes.
Yeah. So Marx claimed that the oppression was class oriented. You know, the bourgeoisie oppressed the proletariat, but the exact same ideas were taken and turned into the gender oppression, where men are the bourgeoisie and the women were the proletariat, oppressed on all sides. So I think there's no doubt that all of these ideas were floating around in all of these communities, including the emancipation communities.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree. And if you go back even further, like if you go back to Mary Wollstonecraft,
yes,
in the British context in 1792, she writes A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. But she was also, as a lefty intellectual, deeply influenced by the French Revolution. So, this idea, like both leftism in general and feminism in particular, I think share that idea, this fascination with the notion of starting society over again, rebuilding it from the ground up out of the rubble of the old, which must be, completely torn down, and the notion that you can change human nature itself if you change the social structures. That is deeply there in Marxism. It was deeply there in the architects of the French Revolution, that notion that there really is no such thing as human nature. It's all social, they don't use the phrase social constructionism, but you can see they're definitely making the exact same argument about how everything is determined by our social relations, social context. That, of course, becomes really dominant in feminism, but it in later stages of feminism, but it's there from the early beginnings. And if you really want to determine, if anybody is not quite sure whether Marxism and feminism share a common vocabulary and a common way of thinking, and I think probably like co-created a lot of these ideas, you specifically should read Engels' book, The Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State, published in 1884, yes, originally in German, based on notes that he found amongst Marx's papers. Marx had just died, and then translated into English fairly shortly after, I think. But you can see it there. He explicitly says that women in marriage are the proletariat under the bourgeois oppressor. He specifically talks about women in marriage as sex slaves, as prostitutes. And feminists went crazy with that language afterwards, and used it extensively from the 1880s onward, the notion of marriage as a form of sex slavery for women.
Wow.
I know, it's
so
crazy. No distinction
Yeah.
between the family home where children are raised and where the father comes home with it, having worked all day for the benefit of his wife and children. No distinction between that and prostitution or sex slavery. Yeah.
Well, there's also some delicious irony in the modern popularity of very strong BDSM content, like 50 Shades of Grey, the books, the movies, super bestsellers, outselling the Bible, I think, or close to it in America in recent years. And these are women where women are literally tied up, spanked, butt plugged, like really wild stuff. It's even portrayed in the movies. Never mind, I think the books are even a little more explicit. But I do want to flash forward a little bit. We're talking about this late 1700s, 1800s, and the early 1900s. These days, a lot of the ideas you're talking about, the origins of them, they seem to have grandchildren. That would be like, ultra radical feminism. I'm proud of killing babies and stuff. Or, I'm putting on a pink hat and I'm blood all over my face, fake blood. But also BLM, obviously, is very explicitly Marxist. And I think even wokeism, for lack of a better term, all the woke stuff, that seems to be like a grandchild of Karl Marx and even a child of feminism. So you kind of have these different, you have this like super radical feminism, modern feminism, the super woke stuff, which is its own thing. You have the trans ideology, trans monstrosity stuff. And then you have BLM stuff. So you have the racial, you have the gender trans, you have feminism, you have kind of general woke. And it's all these little like monsters are just being born out of the corpse of Karl Marx and early feminists.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me about the
Hydra? The Hydra.
It is. It's all there. And again, if you go back to if you look at academic feminism, as early as the 1970s, you can see all of those manifestations being articulated there in they called it intersectional feminism. And it was the idea that there were various types of oppression. They've never been very interested in class oppression, though that was the one that Marx was most interested in. That they're not interested in working people, because working people are notoriously, I think, most resistant to all of their crazy ideas. But every other form of oppression, they started talking a lot about racial oppression in the 1970s, and making distinctions between Black women who were, doubly oppressed, and white women had to, in a way, apologize for their privilege and acknowledge the greater oppression, and therefore, in some ways, the greater virtue of Black women. And then you introduce sexuality into the mix. So Black lesbians were more oppressed than Black women, who were more oppressed than white women. But then you had lesbian white women, and where did they fit in? And, you started to get that whole hierarchy of victimhood and the competition between members of victim groups for superior victim status and superior right to speak. All of that is clearly in operation already in the 1970s and 1980s. Plus, the emphasis on the social construction of womanhood and then of Blackness and of everything. And so that spawns ultimately the trans movement. And you get all this splitting within feminism now, so that you have the rad femmes opposed to the social constructionist feminists who support trans ideology, and various other kinds of oppositions and rivalries and antagonisms within these various groups. But yeah, it's all there within feminism. You can find it. I've done a lot of work on that too, and in some originary documents within feminist theory in the academy, and it has just spread out now, and it has taken all of these popular culture forms in the 21st century, but it was definitely birthed there.
Wow. Steve, any commentary on the hydra of Marxism, communism, feminism, wokeism, BLMism, transism?
Yeah, just a simple comment, I suppose. I mean, the hydras, for audiences that aren't familiar with the hydra, is a mythical monster with many heads, and when you cut one off, another one or two more grow, or something like this. Have I got that right? Roughly? And that seems to fit here quite well. And I think the key to killing the hydra, you can't cut off its heads because they just grow back. We have to go to the root. The root of feminism is the lies. The lies that are even in their founding document. And I think the most important of the lies is that the history of humanity is defined by men oppressing women on all sides. And we can demonstrate that is demonstrably false. The history, of course, there were evils of one group to another of every description. That's the way human beings are. We act very badly very often. But the history of male-female relations is a history of men seeking to woo women, to convince them to mate with them, and then to provide and protect them. And men fight among themselves for that. But it's never like you can't characterize the sweep of history as being men oppressing women. If we must characterize the sweep of gender history of relationships between men and women, it is more accurately characterized by men trying to woo women, not rape. Rape is a very rare, and it's almost a non-influence on the evolution or the population of humanity. Now, I'll give you an example as to why of that. But the sweep of history is characterized by men trying to woo or convince or seduce women into mating with them, then protecting and providing for both the women and children, and building the civilization within which that can be done. That's the sweep of history, the true sweep of history. Now, I want to just touch quickly on this idea of rape, because feminists are obsessed with rape. If you ask a feminist, they will probably say that the world is populated by people who are children of rape, which is utterly false, because the genetic analysis of human history, going back to the origins in Africa, will tell you that approximately 80% or more of women reproduced, but only 20% of men reproduced. That means that women are choosing the dominant men. That's the statistic. There's no argument against that. If rape was a significant contributor to the population of humanity, we would see we would probably see almost the We would see, say, a much more distorted or equal representation in the genetics of present-day human beings. We would see men who could not seduce women. We would see their genes popping up all over the place. So the fact that only 20% of the men reproduced suggests that women are seducing those men, the top men. And we see that today. A study after study has shown that 80% of women consider, most, I'm going to get the stats wrong, but 80% of men are considered unsuitable for reproduction by 80% of women.
So nothing's
all
changed.
Women, huh?
So nothing's changed. It's the same
Nothing's
old, same
changed.
old.
It's the same old, same old.
Yeah.
If rape was a significant contributor to reproduction, we would see a more 50-50 distribution of the genes. We would see more representation amongst less capable men.
It makes you wonder too how many millions upon millions of men throughout history and even today were weeded out of the gene pool, had their genes effectively murdered by a woman through fraud, through lies and deception and basically cuckolding. You know, how many men thought they reproduced but didn't, and really it was only the 19 or 20% of whatever that did.
Yeah, well, we certainly see that today.
Yeah, paternity fraud. Yeah, we've had Carnell Smith, who you probably know, has been a speaker at our event and on our channel a couple of times, and he talks extensively about this. 30% of men in America who are tested for paternity fraud, turns out they are not the father. No chance, zero. And we're talking like 500,000 men a year or something like that are tested, and 150,000 or more they're not the father. They never were. It was never even possible.
Yeah.
These women are liars. It's almost, also what you're saying, Steve and Janice, it makes me think that basically in the 1800s, late 1700s and early 1800s, there was like a contingent of women who basically just turned on men very viciously. And that is now sprawled into this giant cancer of feminism that keeps brainwashing women to turn on men and to hate fathers and to resent their own femininity and even the value of building a family, which obviously used to be much more normal, even when you guys were young, much younger. That's all gone now.
I think that the resentment of men have been with women forever.
I agree.
And I touch on this on the Birth of Feminism video. There's a natural tendency. Natural tendency isn't the right wording I'm going for, but let's put it this way: men are obviously bigger in general, bigger, stronger, faster, and this is going to get me in a lot of hot water, but on average, smarter. We're talking
no disagreement from me.
Well, and I'm not present. I'm not saying this as a criticism of women.
No, don't worry about it. Yeah.
Yeah. What I mean to say is that even I remember reading a study in New Scientist magazine back in the early 1990s, and they had determined that baby boys are born with 20 to 50% more brain cells than baby girls are. And by the age of about middle age, they are equal. So, and the theory at the time was put forward that men have evolved to have more brain cells because they needed to seduce women. And those men who were smart enough to seduce women succeeded, and their genes went forward. And that ended up propagating males with more brain cells, and they're specifically needed for that particular reason. Of course,
it's interesting. Yeah, of course they need to. Part of what they need to seduce women is to be able to compete with other men,
exactly,
and to find a respected place in the hierarchy of men. And so that whole thing of forming hierarchies and also working together as a group with other men in order to accomplish things and get things done and protect one's community, whatever, all those things do require a specific kind of intelligence, whereas what women are doing are mainly looking after children and, being concerned about resources for themselves and their children because they're vulnerable. And so, to imagine that those evolutionary needs haven't created enormous differences in intelligence, in ability, in manner of thinking is just foolishness.
Most geniuses are, I was gonna say most geniuses are men by far. I know there's a lot of
by far.
And that sticks way out there. I mean, it's way out there on the bell curve.
Yeah.
I want to make a point about this before we go off this topic, is that this obviously was a very sensitive thing to be publishing and talking about in the 1990s. And as we went into the 2000s, that research has been deleted.
Disappeared, yeah.
That has been deleted.
Wow.
I distinctly remember, and we talked about this. We used to get, I worked in research at Dow Chemical at the time. And we used to get circulated around, all the science magazines come around on circulation. We all read the same magazines and the reports that are coming out. What topic it was on didn't really matter. We were all just into the science, right? And so when that came around, it was a lot of talk in the coffee breaks and everything like that. And you had to be sensitive about it, because it's
well, I don't see why it makes people so upset, actually, because
of feminism. That's why.
Well, yeah. But putting that aside, just because the members of a group in general are more intelligent or more inclined to this, more likely to be genius, etc., that doesn't mean that any individual cannot strive for greatness and may not be capable of greatness. Obviously, there are many great women throughout history, individuals. So there's no attack on the individual. Clearly, if as a society, if we judged people according to their group status, which is what BLM and feminists and everybody else want us to do, if we did that, then it would have negative consequences. But if you regard everyone as an individual and judge them based on what they show they're capable of doing, then there's no problem. But I agree with you, Steve, that I do think there is this deep resentment in women, and that it has been there throughout history. It couldn't be expressed in earlier eras because it simply couldn't be. Women and men were codependent. Obviously, men needed women for reproduction, for sexual companionship, because they have a longing for female to mate with females and to have children, and women needed men to survive, literally, and for their children to survive. As soon as that was no longer the case, when essentially nature had been tamed to the point that and government established to protect life and person and home, then women no longer had to rely on individual men. And that resentment, I think, that you're talking about, that I do believe is deeply rooted, it was able to flourish. And it had nothing to do, I often hear men, well-intentioned men saying, well, most of these feminists, they've had bad experiences with men. And that's why they became feminists. So they're trying to understand where the hatred and the suspicion comes from. But that certainly hasn't been my experience of the women I have known who are feminists, and it isn't borne out by the research. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, to mention her again, was an extremely privileged woman. Most feminist leaders were privileged women who were, given a good education at a time when most men didn't have access to a good education. They were raised in households where they were given every opportunity to exercise their talents. They weren't held back because of their sex. They weren't abused by the men in their life. They often married men who were extremely supportive of their activism, their writing, whatever it was that they were doing as feminists. So it isn't the experience that produces the ideology. It's the ideology that then informs everything that they see and perceive. And that's clear with Stanton. She met these abolitionist women who were starting to develop feminist ideas and feminist resentment. She became a feminist. She then met Susan B. Anthony, who wasn't a feminist. She convinced her to become a feminist. It's through the spread of the ideology that the resentment and the anger and the hatefulness and the desire for vengeance take root.
If I can pause you, feminism as cancer is a very popular term these days, but the way you're describing it, it almost sounds more like a virus that spreads and spreads and spreads and replicates itself.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit different than cancer, which can be caused by viruses. But yeah, I wonder if we should say feminism is a virus, like a new meme.
Yeah, feminism is a mind virus. I mean, I really do think it is. And and that's why, as Steve was saying, we really do need to get to the root of it and just, absolutely destroy it at that point, because sort of accepting any of its postulates and accepting any of the shame that men have been forced to take into themselves, accepting any of these ideas about female moral superiority and how we need women because women have a deeper empathy for others, or women care more.
They're angels. They're angels, Janice. Women are angels.
I mean, it's really it's so obvious that is actually the way to ruin a group of people. If you tell them that they have been wronged and that they weren't responsible for that wrong, and because they were so deeply wrong that they had no agency and still have no agency, so they're not responsible for anything bad that they or their group does. Wow, I mean, it is a recipe for a deep attenuation of moral agency, and that's what we witness today everywhere in our society. And it's no surprise that we witness it, because that's what the ideology teaches. So anybody who wants a sane society has to reject everything about feminism, including this idea, as Steve said, that men oppressed women. They never did.
That's one of the centrals. And I think the general sense of the root of the Hydra, feminism, is lies. They started with lies, and look at how, like lies always do, they grow and they transform into other lies and other lies and other lies. So you see this proliferation of lies today around feminism, like all sex is rape, that a woman's feeling, how she reanalyzes her feelings in the past about her sexual relations is a rape. It's all comes from the beginning is like Orwell would talk about this kind of thing. You get the lie, you get them to believe the lie, and then you can get them to believe anything. So we have to attack the lies that are at the core of feminism. And one of the principal lies I said earlier is this arc of history being men's oppression of women. History does not support that interpretation in any manner. I want to touch on just one other thing here. When we talked about female resentment of men, I think part of it comes from a female mating choice strategy in which women and the male community talks about this a lot, test men. When in the psychology of testing men, it implies that you look down upon them. You must pass this test. You must pass this other test. Look at how you failed this test. You failed. You failed. You failed. This is all kind of shaming, looking down upon movement. And psychologically, that is accompanied with a resentment, a kind of a paradoxical resentment of that other person. Because in reality, like I mentioned before, men are faster, bigger, stronger, smarter. Now, that sets up all of the psychological conditions for envy. And I know there's a lot of Christians in your subscriber base. I think they may be familiar with the story of Cain and Abel. And I talk about this in the Birth of Feminism video. The story of Cain and Abel is where Cain is envious of Abel for being favored by God. It's an envy so deep that it can only be assuaged by eliminating the object of his envy, being Abel. Cain slays Abel. And this is the kind of envy that is possessed, the core to feminists, is that their envy of men for all these things. Men, in a sense, are favored by God by their larger size, strength, speed, and brains, let's say. So there are all the conditions for the encouragement of envy amongst women. That doesn't mean that, again, Janice touched on dealt with this topic. It doesn't mean men are in general better than women. It doesn't mean any of that.
Well, it means they're better at certain things.
Well,
and,
I mean,
I think
in the general sense.
Yeah,
like,
it doesn't mean
you're
they're
not
superior.
a better human being.
Yeah, it means they are. It means they are the culture builders, and I don't have any problem admitting that, or I mean, I don't have to admit it. I celebrate it, I feel grateful that the men who came before me, with the help of their women, obviously, that they built such a wonderful civilization where I didn't have to worry about all sorts of physical health threats. And
as an American, I'm very thankful for the women who gave birth to the founding fathers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
not only the founding six, but all the men who signed the Declaration of Independence. They all had mothers. Thank God.
And throughout history, Janice, you talked about this in your last, two videos ago with the poetry. Men throughout history have praised, celebrated, elevated women for their beauty, for their home,
their morality.
And that's continuing, and that's innate in men. When men come to reproductive age, they don't go out there and say, "Oh, what a bunch of creepy women." They are obsessively in love with women.
Yeah,
they praise them, they pursue them.
Yeah.
So,
the interesting.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, in talking about resentment and envy, and recognizing that the other sex has certain capacities that one's own sex in general doesn't have. That does seem to have bred this resentment in women, which I don't really understand it, but it could work the other way too, in that like women have the capacity to give birth, and women have qualities of physical beauty perhaps that men in general don't have. Women do have the capacity to nurture children. So those things, and I think men have sometimes throughout the ages talked about a certain kind of feeling in awe of women. Women are physically, in some ways, not physically stronger, but they're more resistant to disease. They live longer, all those kinds of things. So those could be sources of resentment and envy on the part of men.
And probably are. They probably are.
Well, sometimes men do talk about. Yeah, men do sometimes talk about the awesome power of the female body, to house a child and then to birth it, and then to be able to feed it, from the woman's own body with her milk and, all those kinds of things. But it somehow, whatever resentment might be there amongst men, doesn't develop into a movement to persecute women or to talk about how contemptible women are. It ends up being channeled in some of the different directions that you were just talking about, the building of civilization, the writing of love poetry or love songs that we see today, and all of the various forms that men actually pay tribute to women or even pay homage to women. So it's like the asymmetry is striking, and I think that's always going to be an issue. It is an issue, I think, that men, that many men never really get the chance to have a woman of their own and to have their own family that they're judged and found wanting. That has existed in every culture, that many men are sexually and emotionally deprived in that sense. That is an even greater problem today, because there seem to be fewer and fewer channels for men to find meaning and identity. And now on top of that burden that men always had to face of proving themselves as men, proving themselves as worthy of a woman's love, now they have, this mountain of propaganda aimed at telling them that they're nothing, that, as Anthony said on that program, the future is female, and that men are awful, and that all men can do, if they even want just not to be hated quite so much, is to do nothing, as Susanna, I always forget her last name.
Susanna Reid.
Oh.
Walters. Susanna Walters, the professor from Northeastern University, who wrote that article in the Washington Post called "Why Can't We Hate Men?" And she said, all you can do, men, if you want to not be hated quite so much, is to step back, step away from the power. We've got it. Let women vote for feminist women. Let women take over, because women are so much superior and will do such a better job. So. And like, it's just amazing to me that with that mountain of hatred coming at them all the time, and the other pressures that, the evolutionary pressures that have always been there, that more men don't hate women. And like, they just don't, men still, I don't know, there's still this sort of dignified kind of willingness, even amongst the most hurt men, the men who have had these horrible divorce experiences and everything else, to just to go on and to continue to try to make some kind of contribution to their society, and the willingness to see the best in women, and to hope for some kind of rapprochement in the future where men and women can work together and just build a better society. Like, I find that extraordinary, and I salute men for that. And I'm really sad that women don't see that, and that more women don't just say, oh, come off it. Like, let's stop the hatred.
Yeah, men love women a lot. And I think this has been underestimated in recent decades or centuries. And even in the midst of a long-standing, multi-generational, abusive relationship that's been forming under the guise of feminism, men still love women. That love runs very deep. It's like species deep, and it's been even in the face of like legitimate abuse. One book I'm reading recently right now is what's the name? A friend of mine gave it to me. It's a very rare book about the patriarchy. I think it's like The Return of Patriarchy. It came out in the 80s. Anyway, he talks about how if men got together today and did their own kind of Seneca Falls thing, they could itemize a lot of the stuff out of what the feminists were even dreaming of in 1848. Men are oppressed today, and men are systematically abused in family court and divorce court, and these things are real. They're not invented. They're not exaggerated. Like, this is very serious, and no one cares. No one cares.
It's in the law.
Nothing.
It's in the law. It's in the law. I mean, you can look up the laws in which discriminate against men, and it's written right there.
Yeah.
And it just gets worse and worse. They're like, oh, wait, how much worse can we make it? Child support is already screwed up and causes a million problems. Let's make it, let's retroactivate it to conception. Oh, you're 3 weeks pregnant. You need vitamin gummy bears. Here's child support for $500 a month. Like, it's insane.
I know. And you go to prison. You go to prison if you can't pay it.
It's worse than that. Let me be clear. In America, anyway, you will go to prison at gunpoint if you don't pay. And if you don't want to go to prison, they're going to kill you. This is how this works. When there's an arrest warrant out for your arrest, for whatever the charge is. Each state is different in America, how they treat failure to pay child support. But ultimately, you will be arrested. And if you don't want to go, they're going to put a gun in your head and shoot you. If you're going to defend yourself, you don't want to get arrested or whatever you want to do, you're going to go on the run. They're not playing around. Like, they will shoot you. This is how this works.
It's incredible. Yeah. I know.
And if you fight back, if you say, I'm not okay with this, they're going to kill you, and they're going to paint you with the local news as some domestic terrorist. You hate women. He shot at the cops, blah, 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 because you were getting screwed. That's not even your kid even. I know there's a lot of stories about men paying child support under penalty of law when it's not their kid, even when they can prove it's not their kid.
The state is not interested. Yeah. I mean, it has nothing to do with justice whatsoever.
Yeah. This is cause in my mind for revolution. Like, the founding fathers would have been shooting a long time ago.
That alone, as you say, and all the other things, like the decades of affirmative action hiring that have denied men equal opportunities to work. I mean, I find that that was my initiator really into anti-feminism, was seeing how that was working in academia. It had been in place for decades before I came along and saw it in action in the late 1990s. And it's been going on ever since. It's been ramped up even more now. There's all sorts of set aside positions for members of particular groups, but there's still all sorts of professorships set aside for women only. And women dominate the university. Some universities are close to 70-30 now, female to male. Most are 60-40. And yet they're still banging on about the need to get more women into the few disciplines where women don't dominate. They don't do anything about all the disciplines that are totally dominated by women, to the detriment of the disciplines too, and the wider society. I mean, that in itself, that to me, like the denial to white men in particular, of the ability to pursue the career they want. I find that overwhelming. And every time I try to write about it, if I tweet about one more example, somebody will always say, oh, well, after 200 years when, men excluded women, this is a very minor thing. It's been going on for nearly 50 years now, and it is atrocious. And men should be marching in the streets, and women should be marching in the streets with them to demand an end of it. We're supposed to live in a society that values equality before the law and in society general, and yet it couldn't be further from the truth. Just, it's so striking.
It's appalling. Now, before we wrap up today's show, we'll need to end pretty soon. You're both Canadians, so I do want to talk to you about a Canadian issue, namely the country becoming a communist crap hole. Yeah. And recently, for example, Communist Canada was trending on Twitter. It had 20, 30, 40,000 tweets just in a single day. This is not news to either of you, but as both of you being, in my understanding, born and raised in Canada, what are your thoughts on Canada turning towards communism politically and socially in these issues? Was it always like that? Does this concern you? Are you going to flee Canada? Like, what's either one of you can go first on this? Communist Canada.
That's a big topic. I've been saying similar things for years since the pandemic started, but I think there's a general push for socialism all the way around the world through the World Economic Forum. And that's not really news. Their Great Reset, in there they detail out some of what they're going to do, how they're going to do it. And yet people say, if you talk about it, a one world government, for instance, which they explicitly are pushing for, they will call you a conspiracy theorist. So, I mean, how do you fight with the complete denial of what's right in front of your face? And we know that Trudeau was a child of the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders program, as were quite a number of other global leaders. I think the Macron in France was one of them. There's a lot. Mm-hmm. In any case, I don't remember all of them, and you can probably Google it, find out. But Trudeau, for instance, is implementing exactly those policies that the World Economic Forum wants. He's preparing Canada to accept the one world government as defined by the World Economic Forum. And you see the recent legislation. I think there was one proposed in the US and there was one in Great Britain, which I think was adopted. And in Canada was proposed. I'm not sure if they actually passed it or not. And the effect was to give the World Health Organization sovereign control of your country over to the World Health Organization in the event of a global emergency. Mm-hmm. Now, there's an old saying that says, if you let governments take total control on the basis of an emergency, they will always find an emergency. And what did the World Health Organization just do last week? Tedros, the leader of the World Health Organization, he had put together a committee, I think of 15 people, to study the monkeypox virus. And they determined, by vote, a majority determined that it did not warrant the classification as a global emergency. Tedros overruled the committee and declared it a global emergency anyways.
Wow. I didn't know that part.
He overruled it. And been in the news for the last few days. And I encourage anybody listening to look these things up if you have any doubt about it. I've looked into this World Health Organization. It has tentacles everywhere, everywhere. Now, we have a global emergency. There's a pretty damn good chance that then Trudeau and other world leaders will then enact emergency powers on that basis again. Yeah. So, and that's just on top of the things that you guys know that Trudeau's already done. I mean, he enacted emergency powers because of a truckers' protest in Ottawa, a truckers' protest, a peaceful truckers' protest where they had barbecues and big air toys
bouncy
for
castles.
Kids, bouncy castles, and about a significant number of Canadians supported Trudeau for that. And this comes back to my main point. Trudeau's a tyrant, okay? And he froze people's bank accounts. He has political prisoners in jail. One that just got released last week. He just I think yesterday or the day before.
Tamara
that
Leach,
woman, Leach, just released. Okay, Trudeau is a tyrant. Tyrants don't have any power that the people don't let them have. So I put this on the people of Canada, who, my own fellow citizens, who support Trudeau and don't speak out against him. And that includes everybody in the mainstream media in Canada. In case you haven't know this, but back 2 years ago, Trudeau gave a $600 million of grants to the mainstream media, the media he deems qualified. And lo and behold, the mainstream media protect Trudeau. Yeah. And this was on top of $2 billion a year given to the Canadian Broadcasting Organization in Canada. So I mean, you can say that similar things happens in the US, but not to this scale. All of the media that the majority of Canadians will watch is controlled by the Liberal government of Canada. All of it. There's small news outlets that you have to go look for, and every time they put something out there, the mainstream media in one swell will then call them all conspiracy theorists. No matter
Rebel
what
News
it is,
and stuff like
Rebel
that. Right?
News.
Yeah, Rebel
An
News.
awesome site.
True North.
True North is another good one.
Yeah.
And there's some independent people doing stuff out there too. And those are the only people reporting the truth, but they don't have the audience necessary to inform the Canadian public as general. So it still comes down to the fact that Trudeau doesn't have power that Canadians don't give him. They should have, and we spoke about this, and Rex Murphy, a great guy, one of the few really, truly worthwhile journalists left in the mainstream media, Rex Murphy. He spoke out very eloquently against the funding of mainstream media before the bill was passed in the House. And all of those politicians who passed that bill had the option, had the ability to stop it, but they didn't. And then Trudeau got elected again. And get this, okay? Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the Socialist Party of Canada, we call it the NDP, they call themselves the NDP, they're just a socialist party, very far left. They have backed up Trudeau's minority government to the hilt. Trudeau's government could fall any day if any of these politicians had one nerve of moral fiber, especially in the NDPs, because they could call a non-confidence vote and he could be forced out of office any day that the politicians determined or decided that they had one spine cell in them amongst them.
Does the Canadian government function like the British government in terms of the Prime Minister and how their Prime Minister is very similar? Okay, that's what I figured.
Parliamentary system.
Yes.
Okay.
So I got kind of carried away there. I'll let you.
That's excellent, Steve. I have nothing to add really, except that Trudeau is an intersectional feminist. That's all he has. Anytime he is criticized for any of his policies, I mean, he ran in last fall in the election campaign, basically on a platform of hatred against the unvaccinated. It was just extraordinary, the overtness of the hatred and the vilification and demonization. And that's exactly what he did, of course, when the truckers went to Ottawa and they were protesting vaccine mandates, which were ridiculous. These were men mostly who had spent the first year and a half of the pandemic doing the hard work of keeping the supply chains in place and driving their trucks at a time when most rest stops were closed. They couldn't find places to, use the washroom or find a bite to eat or anything. They kept on doing their work. And then suddenly, once the vaccines were brought in, they were being forced to be vaccinated, whether they wanted to or not, just to continue with their jobs. He's now destroyed. His government has set out to destroy those people's lives that went to Ottawa to peacefully protest. They've had their licenses suspended. Many of them will never work again. The debt they're facing is enormous. The bank accounts frozen, everything. It's just it's almost unbelievable, the level of viciousness. But all he has is the mantra of the intersectional feminist. Anyone who criticizes him is a racist, is a sexist, is a homophobe, is a transphobe, is an Islamophobe. We were told that the truckers were white supremacists and Islamophobes. It had nothing to do, with it. Many of them, of course, a lot of them are white guys, working class white men. A lot of them are working class, immigrant men from various countries. It's just so ridiculous, but that's what he has. He spouts that anytime anyone disagrees with him. He says, you're a sexist, you're a misogynist, you're a racist. And that flies with Canadians because Canadians for years and years built a sense of identity on opposition to American individualism and American liberty. And that was essentially a kind of feminist, we're all in this together. All the bromides of the COVID era, those resonate deeply with Canadians because we have this idea that we believe in community, we believe in security. Our motto is not life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our motto is good government. Canadians believe deeply that the government knows best, the government will solve problems, the government will keep us safe. And this is what it leads to, a really horrific tyranny and the oppression of individual rights, even the right to bodily autonomy. It's just horrible.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
I'll go ahead, Steve.
I say they're coming up with a fourth booster now. Mm-hmm. And they've put in this application called ArriveCan, which is destroying travelers' ability to cross the border lately. You may have heard that in the news. And the ArriveCan app has the ability to tell you are now quarantined wherever you are in Canada. And if you break that quarantine, the fines are enormous. They're in the neighborhood of $100,000 or something like this, and possible prison sentence if you break the quarantine. And there are people who are being assigned quarantine who have all their vaccines and all their tests, and yet there is still assigned quarantine. And this app was supposed to be optional at first, okay? Just like the vaccines were initially. Trudeau said the vaccines will always be optional.
Yes,
and then they're mandatory. Mm-hmm. They're optional, except that you can't participate in Canadian society.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Choices have consequences, as all our leftist overlords said to us.
But then this ArriveCan app now, just about 2 weeks ago, I think it was, the government has said that the ArriveCan app will continue after the pandemic. And there was another thing on that same line that is going to transform into, I think it's is it the World Health Organization or the WEF's digital tracking app? Mm-hmm. So Canada is a test case country for the World Economic Forum's Great Reset to see how far they can push people, to see and refine their strategy. It's coming to you.
Well, I support you as an American. I support the right of all Canadians to abolish or reform their government by any means necessary. And I think your countrymen, especially the young men, they have a responsibility to fix the government and do so by any means necessary, especially at this point. This is tyranny. This is sophisticated slow motion slavery, and it's evil, and it has to stop. So I think Canadians are, no offense to either of you, but I think Canadians are in general too nice way too nice, and this needs to stop. All the nice guy stuff needs to stop.
Nice. They're not nice at all. They're smug,
Smug is a better word.
vindictive. They hate anyone who stands out. They hate anybody who achieves over what is considered acceptable. They hate anybody who thinks for himself and offers an alternative opinion on any subject when the subject has already been, decided. They're not nice at all. They're passive. They're compliant. And they're mean-spirited towards anybody who isn't passive and compliant.
It's not the country I grew up in. I'll put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
That's sad.
It's not the country I grew up in any way. I'm in the Dominican Republic. You guys know that. And I don't intend to go. I have not been back since 2019. And so it's coming up on 3 years now. And one of the reasons is the stuff we're talking about now. The other reason is that they're so random with the rules that I don't want to go back there and be trapped in that prison. It's become a prison. My own country will trap me. I don't trust the government, and actually, I don't trust the majority of Canadian people. They are like the traditional squealers. Most of them will squeal on you, if you will.
Wow.
It's a terrible situation. And here's the one saving grace that could happen is that you shame those NDP politicians into abandoning their leader, Jagmeet Singh, who made a deal to back up Trudeau's government. If those individual politicians could have a moral strength and say enough is enough, we need an election, this could end overnight, because I don't think Trudeau will win the next election. I could be wrong, but I don't think so.
Damn. It's sad to hear that these problems exist in America to a significant degree, but they're substantially worse in Canada.
Well, we don't have an opposition. You have pockets. You have a large movement of patriotic Americans who still believe in liberty and small government and individualism. We don't have anything like that here. We don't have any equivalent of red states. We have individuals who are committed to those similar principles. But yeah.
Janice, there's a question, a $5 super chat. Thanks, Vix. Is Janice married? If not, does she ever plan on getting married?
No, I'm married. Yeah, I am.
And what would she tell her younger self when it comes to finding a husband? Dating coach Janice Fiamengo.
Oh, gee, yeah. No, I'm not very good at giving advice. My own life was hardly a model life. Yeah, but I am married, and I know that I'm happiest when I'm married. I need to love.
Well said.
A woman who doesn't hate men and loves them instead. Golly gee, what a rare thing.
That's an important thing that Janice just said. I need to love. That is universal, I think, and this is one of the huge crimes of feminism: is that they really attack this love. They remove the options.
Yeah.
They try to remove the options on people to love one another.
Mm-hmm, it's true.
This is a human need, and
they never talk about love. Almost never.
Yeah.
I mean, I shouldn't say never, but they almost never do. It's a word you don't hear feminists talk about.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
They're filled with hate.
Yeah,
their hearts are filled with.
It is a hate movement.
It really is. Yeah, I should say that I have a wonderful husband too.
Nice. Good.
David is a wonderful guy. I've met him many times. We've had some great conversations, and it's a wonderful couple to spend time with.
Nice.
Thank you very much. I'm privileged to know you both.
No, Thank you, Steve.
Well,
same here.
I want to say thanks to both of you for your time today coming on the show. We're almost about an hour 45, almost 2 hours. So I think we'll wrap it up.
I guess we should wrap it up before we have a big group hug and start sobbing. Love you. Love you both.
Oh, gosh.
It's true, though.
But this has been an excellent discussion. I think the fans learned a lot. The chat was really on fire. A lot of people were really happy to hear this kind of content. So much of what goes on in the men's movement and the manosphere, it's like super simplistic, women are hoes type content. And this is dumb. It's lowbrow stuff. And this is a lot more philosophical and ideological. And I think it's what a lot of men really are concerned about. They're concerned about the future of their country. They're concerned about what feminism is really doing. They're concerned. They're frustrated by people like Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh. Even Dr. Jordan Peterson has said he agrees with most of feminism, not the modern stuff, but a lot of it. And these are people who are, openly, they'll say that they're anti-feminist or something, but then they double back, the politicians and these intellectuals and these leaders. And it's really frustrating when most men in the manosphere and the men's movement, and even more widely that are aware of these issues, they are anti-feminist. It's not a game to them. It's not funny. It's not, they sometimes they will get, wrapped up in some of the whitewashing or whatever you call it, the rose-colored glasses on feminism. It used to be great long, long ago, like some fairy tale, and now it's like terrible. But I think you've both done a lot to dispel that in this episode in like very clear, easy to understand terms. So I appreciate it once again coming on my show. Any final words about upcoming projects? You mentioned both of you are working, I think, together on a documentary on your channel, Steve.
Yeah. Yeah. So please visit our channel at Studio B.
Yeah, there's a link in the description for everybody watching to Steve's channel, Studio B, and studiobrule.com, right?
Studiobrule.com. Yeah, I have to get back to updating that because the deletion of the Studio Brule YouTube channel really threw a wrench in things, bigger than I expected. But everything from the original channel is backed up on Odyssey at Studio Brule Archive, and everything on Studio B is backed up on Rumble at Studio Brule. So you can find it all there. On the project, what we're doing now with what we call the Fiamengo file 2.0, this is fundamentally the research for the documentary. Our dream, is to get the documentary into a theater, because a theater showing is an event. I think as an event, it stands as an event on itself. And I think that's important to have an event like that for what we are going to claim, our thesis here is that feminism is a destructive lie from the very beginning. And so this material that we're doing now forms part of the research for that. One other project I have on the go is it's been on for a long time that I'm kind of stuck on, but I'm hoping to get this completed as well, is a biography of Paul Elam. I started this probably 5-6 years ago. So that's also on the plate.
Nice. I didn't know that. Yeah, he was invited for today's show. He wasn't able to make it the last minute, but he should be on the show soon. So I look forward to that too. He has done a lot for men, and I think that's not been reported on enough.
Right.
So. Yeah, he's had his life is quite interesting.
Yeah. Well, thanks to both of you. I appreciate both of your time. Everyone watching, I appreciate you tuning in live. Hit the like button, leave a comment. 1 comment equals like 10 likes, helps the video get traction, get more views, wake up more men from their blue pill slumber of feminist slavery. Janice, thank you very much. You could follow Janice, by the way, on her Twitter, and she's on Gab. There's a link to her Twitter in the description. Steve's links are in the description. Thanks to everyone. Adios.
Thank you, Anthony.